This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special return guest on the podcast, and you know exactly who it is if you were watching and listening to the previous episode when I was going over the best books of 2023, because I told you we had a surprise interview, and the surprise interview is with the one and only Justin Brierley, because I have given his book that he released this year, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, the title, the vaunted title of the 2023 book of the year, at least according to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. And so he's been on this podcast, I think, 3 other times before, so you can go back and listen to all those other interviews. But in this interview, we just talk about the release of the book, the things that he's seen, the kind of the fruit that he's seen from this book since its release, some of the things that he wished he would have put in there, but just the timing didn't quite work out. But man, we went all over the place in this conversation talking about his current projects he has coming up. It's a great short interview. We just kind of snuck it in. And if you're wondering why it looks like I was recording in the middle of the night, if you're watching it on video, it's because I was recording it basically in the middle of the night, because to get it to where it worked with his schedule in the UK, I had to wake up real early here to kind of pull this all off. But we got it squared away because I wanted to make sure that we had a quick little interview, a little bonus thing for you guys. So tell me thank you, right? I gave you guys a little late Christmas present, so you're welcome. But guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Hey, Justin Brierley, welcome back to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. But you were my first surprise interview to ever happen, because if you listened to my entire episode about the best books of 2023, I surprised the audience with a surprise interview, and it's you. How fun is that?
That is really cool, and I feel honored. Thank you, Kyle. What an honor.
Well, I will tell you, Justin, I know you've gotten a lot of plaudits, and I know you've gotten a lot of praise over your career, but just first real question, what does it feel like to literally get the highest honor that you've ever gotten in your entire career, which is the vaunted best book of the year by Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast?
I thought all of those honors and plaudits would somehow fulfill me. They never did. Only this has truly fulfilled my life, Kyle. So what can I say? This is just
the thing was, my life. You would think that I planned that because I like you so much, but I didn't. I didn't plan it. And just in all honesty, and I told you this off air, I feel no need to give somebody praise if they don't deserve it. Like, I just don't have it in my personality. Like, if somebody sucks, I'll probably more likely tell them they suck than to tell them that they're just, oh yeah, you're perfect. You're a perfect little snowflake. But the surprising rebirth of belief in God, I don't want to, it may sound offensive for me to say that I was surprised, but I wasn't expecting this based off of some of the other stuff that I've read of yours. And it wasn't because the stuff that I've read of yours wasn't good. It was obviously the opposite of that, but it was just because the arguments that were made, how forceful it was from the beginning, because maybe I've been lulled to sleep, Justin. There's a lot of books that are punchy towards the middle and the end. Yeah. Yours was punchy from the beginning. Was that part of the plan?
Well, all I can say is it was the book I had inside me, and you know, that first chapter, I just knew that there was this story to tell about the changing conversation on God, about the way that the new atheism had risen and fallen. And yeah, it just sort of seemed to flow. So all joking aside, I am genuinely honored that you chose this book as your book of the year, Carl. So thank you very much.
Well, and as everybody saw on the list before, there were some monsters that were on the list before I got to number one. But it's one of those things, like, whenever I sat down, because as I finish a book, I'll put a note on my phone that I finished that book. But if there's one that I know by the end of the year will probably be in my top 5, top 10, I just will, bold it. But then I don't think about it again until I go back to the list, and then I start evaluating. And this year, I mean, like, the top 5, I was like, how in the world, the difference between 5 and 4, I felt like I was splitting hairs. But honestly, the way that the cookie crumbled was me going back to our old interview, and we spent so much time just on the first chapter. And so I guess from a writing standpoint, since I'm not an author, a published author myself, was there any concern from you or the editor or anyone like that by putting so much dense material in that first chapter? Did people think, this might turn people off, or you need to, get people to read a few chapters to get a little bit of momentum or anything like that? Was any of that part of the consideration?
I remember. So it's interesting you focus on the first chapter, because I wrote the first chapter kind of almost as a pitch for the book to some publishers a couple of years ago now, when I was first, and it got a lot of interest, actually. And people felt this was an exciting story. The question was whether the momentum could, in a sense, could be continued through the remaining chapters, because the first chapter does tell a very specific, unique story about this rise of this movement of new atheism and how it kind of all internally collapsed for all of these kind of reasons to do with the growing culture wars and everything else. But I felt there was actually a really interesting story to be told about what happened in the wake of that collapse. And I hope, that I did do a good job of actually showing the way in which this conversation has now emerged, out of that whole scenario. So it was definitely one of those things where I felt like I had a really strong start to the book. Whether it could be continued was the next question. But yeah, I'm glad to say that it seems to have done that. And happily, Kyle, you're not the only platform to have recognized the book. It actually did make the finalist list for Christianity Today's Book Awards as well, in the apologetics and evangelism category. So yeah,
we don't care about them. Nobody even reads them anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, Christianity who? I mean, come on.
This isn't the 1950s when Billy Graham was running it, okay? This is the now time, and nobody likes anybody over there anymore. Well, let's just start generically. What interesting things have you seen this year since the book has been released? What's some interesting feedback that you've gotten? Like, how do you feel about how the book has done in terms of its impact so far?
Well, I've just been delighted with the feedback I've had. So many people coming out of the blue to tell me that they've read the book, they've enjoyed the book. Lots of people across different sort of spectrums, if you like, not just Christians, but non-Christians who've been reading it. I've had dozens of emails from people who said, I've basically been on the journey you described in this book, Justin. I was basically a new atheist a few years ago, and I've come round. And sometimes there are people who are kind of still exploring whether Christianity is true, or people who've gone all the way. So that's been really interesting. The other kind of really exciting thing, actually, is seeing the book kind of playing out in real time this autumn. So I'm sure you may have heard of this story of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was this ex-Muslim, Somali-born speaker and thinker, who was very much in the mid-2000s part of the New Atheist set, shared stages with Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins and others. And then just last month in November, writes this viral article for Unheard titled Why I Am Now a Christian, and essentially spells out more or less the thesis of much of the book, of the reasons why she has embraced Christianity. Now, that provoked all kinds of interesting responses from both skeptics and Christians. Well, is this a real conversion? Because it was a lot of kind of civilizational, cultural kind of issues she was dealing with. But you go on and read more of the article and some of her other interviews, you see there's obviously a spiritual pull towards Christianity going on as well. So it's obviously not the end of her story, but so interesting to see what I describe in the book happening then in that very specific, quite high profile instance. And being able to then kind of tell those stories in real time, because I've now launched the podcast that goes with the book. So we were able to kind of pick up some of that current stuff going on. So yeah, it's been a really, really exciting and very gratifying to see that all happening.
Well, I want to make sure that we talk about the podcast, the new podcast, before we get out of here. But, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, but obviously there was another one, Kat Von D. So yes. I don't know how big she is over in the UK, but in America, like, she's very popular. She had a very popular show, has, millions of Twitter followers and Instagram followers and all that. And then all of a sudden comes out with that beautifully produced video of her getting baptized. And I just remember, and I don't know if this is just my personal cynicism or pessimism, my first thought was, is she about to launch like a new clothing line? Like, is this like, it's going to have a bunch of black crosses on it or something like that? But then you hear her interview with Allie Beth Stuckey. You hear some of the other stuff she's done. And I was so moved for whatever reason. Like, I'm even getting a little bit emotional thinking about it now, because you can tell she means it, but she's like a baby deer right now. And so immediately the heresy hunter people were all after her for not using the right language, or saying that she chose Jesus because obviously Jesus chose you because I'm a Calvinist and I'm right. But it's like, I think that we're going to have so many more opportunities as Christians, Justin, to embrace these people that have big profiles and say, hey, our tent's real big. Like, you happen to have more Instagram followers than me, but you were just as lost as grandma was before the end of this. Do you feel like we're going to see more of this kind of, celebrity-ish type thing coming?
Yeah. I hope, obviously, it's great in a sense when it is the well-known people, the Ayaan Hirsi Ali's, Kat Von D and so on, those kind of who already have a platform and a celebrity status, because it helps us to feel like, hey, there's something significant going on. But at the same time, I have that concern that we don't want to put them on suddenly on some pedestal. They are, as you say, just at the very beginning of their journey. And I do get really, I get similarly annoyed when Christians steam in saying you didn't get this right, you didn't use the right language. It's like, come on, give them a chance to even get established. I mean, when you were first became a Christian, did you have everything sorted out in your mind? Of course you didn't. And likewise, I think it's just a case of actually understanding that this is all God's grace. Okay. People come to faith for all kinds of motives. They're never pure. None of us become Christians for all the right reasons. Okay. But that's okay, because that's the way God works in his grace. And so let's just give them the space to have the journey they need to go on. And let's just rejoice in the fact that people are finding Christ in these sorts of ways. Now we can then talk about, the bigger picture and the social situations and, the cultural movements that are happening. And that's what I'm doing through the book and the podcast. But I don't want us to sort of just jump on these stories and immediately start to tear into them. I think that we can celebrate them. We can give them some space to be who they are and to go on that journey.
When I think there's another somewhat nefarious undercurrent that happens with things like this, Justin, it's that some people want really cool people on their team. So in America, when Kanye West started wearing the MAGA hat and going and hanging out with Donald Trump and saying he was Republican and all that type of stuff, people that otherwise would have hated Kanye West just because of the kind of music he makes and some of the ways that he's treated women and things that he's, rapped about or whatever, they were all of a sudden like, oh, we got a cool guy on our team. He's got 30 million followers on Instagram and now he's on our team. And then it's like, as Ben Shapiro said, you live by the Kanye, die by the Kanye. So that plane crashed and burned pretty heavily. But I get concerned when Christians are so invested in Jordan Peterson coming to Christ or Joe Rogan coming to Christ or pick a famous person coming to Christ, where it's like, guys, your neighbor is lost. Your neighbor, actually, you can have an impact on that person's life and share the gospel with them. And you're worried about a podcaster or a famous author. Talk to me a little bit about that, because I get concerned that Christians are focusing on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the big mistake is for us as Christians or as a church to hitch our bandwagon to any individual or any celebrity. That's always going to be a route to disappointment, because they are human, and they will fall off those pedestals. I really appreciate Jordan Peterson and a lot of his wisdom and the questions he's asking, but he doesn't have all the right answers. Of course he doesn't. And yeah, maybe he will eventually find his way into Orthodox Christianity. That would be wonderful. But I'm still not going to be treating him as some kind of Messiah figure, a spiritual leader. I think he's an important voice, and it's important to see that. What I really appreciate, though, is that he's actually, I'm not so concerned about actually where he ends up himself, because I think, none of us will really in the end know the heart of Jordan Peterson. We can leave that stuff to God. But what I am interested in is he seems to be opening up the door to other people, especially a lot of young men, to take Christianity seriously. And I know many people who have walked through that door to, vibrant, committed Christian faith. And so to that extent, that's what I want to celebrate, if you like, not Peterson per se and his wherever he is on that journey, but the fact that people are finding God because he opened a door for them,
Well, and he's become a pseudo spiritual father, and I don't mean that in a negative way, because some people would say that in a negative way. So just in one aspect, Justin, that he has given people license to take the scriptures seriously, because he himself takes them so seriously, regardless of whether or not he thinks they're, mytho history, like what William Lane Craig might say, or some sort of, thing like that. He takes them so seriously. A 25-year-old skeptic who was, marinated in the government schools and then went to a university and was further marinated in that ideology is all of a sudden like, wait a minute, maybe this isn't just a book of myths. Maybe this isn't just a book that's changed a million times over the last couple of thousand years. Maybe this is something I should actually reckon with. And then they go to God's word and God speaks to them. I think that's a very important thing to think about as well. Now, Justin, I'm the type of person that I'm my biggest critic. So if I put out a podcast, if I write a devotional, if I write a sentence via text, and then I go back and read it and go, God, you're so dumb. Like, why, what were you thinking? And so that's just how I am. Now I'm well over 500 podcasts in now. And so I've had to kind of chill out just a little bit, like give myself some grace and really love myself and all that nonsense. But for you, I'm sure that there are things that you wish you could have put in the book, or wish that you did put in the book, or you're like, oh my gosh, I should have argued this and I just left it out entirely. Give me the backstory. What are some of those things you wish were in the book?
Yeah. There's so many things that you do come to afterwards and realize, hey, that would have made so much sense to have included. I mean, in a funny way, had I known about Ayaan Hirsi Ali's kind of the movement she was going in, that would have just been a perfect story to include in the book. It's just so perfectly encapsulates the kind of movement that I'm talking about. So I feel like, hey, I should have at least given her a mention, in the book.
Yeah.
Maybe second edition that'll come around. I think the other aspect, I think my thoughts have just crystallized a lot on certain issues. And so, for instance, I really get the sense now that I only discovered after I'd kind of sent off the manuscript that for instance some new atheist authors, thinkers like Peter Boghossian, were already talking in very similar terms to the way I talk in the book about the idea that we're all inherently religious and we will make a religion out of something if it's not Christianity. And it turned out Peter Boghossian had already kind of given this a name, the substitution hypothesis, this idea that when you get rid of something institutionally religious like Christianity, you just replace it with something like the woke religious ideologies that he's currently invested in fighting. And so it would have been useful to perhaps have been more engaged in the fact that there were other people like him noticing this and being able to sort of speak into that. At the same time, at this point, it's interesting because it's a very much a snapshot of a cultural moment. And when I sent off the manuscript to the publisher about a year ago, that was it. It's going to be what it was. You're inevitably going to have lots of then things happen that you would wish you could have included and so on. But that's all you can do. Having said that, it still feels like it's all pretty interesting and relevant. One thing that did happen just recently, you're probably aware of this, is there's been all this controversy around Russell Brand.
Of course,
and the sexual abuse allegations and everything else. Well, I do mention Brand, not that I've interviewed him or anything, but I mentioned him as one example of someone who's been kind of going on a spiritual journey. He's very much left the hedonistic part of his life behind, and he's certainly not a Christian at this point, but he seems to be opening himself up to Christianity and spiritual issues. Obviously that kind of small part of that chapter now looks a little bit like, oh, okay. And now he's kind of having all of these allegations put against. But what can you do? That's, I go on the information I have at the time. My hope and prayer is that Russell Brand, whatever you think of the allegations, that people will give him the grace to understand that people change over time, and whatever he's been accused of, certainly as far as I can see, lives in the past that he now deeply regrets at some level. So anyway, that's those kinds of things happen, and you just have to accept them as they come.
Well, and also, I don't know how it is in that country, but in this country, we still at least purportedly have a assumption of innocence for people. And, Russell Brand's another person to where it's like people get really, really tribal about certain people. So like Donald Trump's the most extreme example. There's nobody that's neutral in Donald Trump. He's either loved or loathed. That's basically how it is. But same thing with Russell Brand. There were people that automatically are like, well, those women are lying. And then there were people that are like, he obviously did those things. And it's like, y'all have no idea. Can we just let this process play out? But I'm reminded of the process. So John Cooper, lead singer of Skillet's, a good buddy of mine. He was writing his new book, Wimpy, Weak and Woke. And I remember him sending me manuscripts as he was writing. And every time he thought the book was coming to a close, a new big cultural thing happened. And he's like, I can't not put this in there because it'll come out afterwards. But I guess the question I have in terms of how that goes, you mentioned the woke stuff and people creating a religion out of that. I feel like, and I'm certainly not pointing something out that's unique here, I feel like the woke thing is starting to really lose steam. So this is coming out, well after this, but you had the presidents of MIT and Harvard and Penn go before Congress and absolutely make just complete jerks of themselves by not being able to just say, if you call for intifada, if you call from the river to the sea for Palestine to be free, which basically means we're going to kill millions of Jews, that's not good. That obviously goes against our code of conduct. And they just couldn't say it because they're so anti-Semitic. But then also the trans thing with children, boys competing in girls' sports. males hurting girls, like physically hurting them, breaking bones in their faces by spiking a volleyball in their face or hitting them in the face with a field hockey ball or something like that. I feel like the woke thing, people kind of tutted it for a while, and they were like, okay, let's just be nice. Let's be known for what we're for, not what we're against. Now it's like, wait a minute. Now there's a bearded person that's going against my daughter in basketball. This is unacceptable. Do you see it going that direction as well?
I think there is a sense in which the progressive thing just does begin to eat itself at some point, and you increasingly, I think what I've noticed is people who would have traditionally seen themselves as on the left, liberal, progressive end of things, even they starting to realize, no, this thing's got out of hand. This has gone way too far. And so that's so the interesting thing is again, one of the things I noticed again since, not having the opportunity to update the book any longer is so many comedians and folk who are now effectively coming out and saying, no, there's got to be a limit to this, because we can no longer do comedy if these are the new rules about what's allowed and what's not allowed. That so many people who just want some common sense in this whole thing, who've realized that this has really gone off the rails. And that's very interesting, because it's even here in the UK, the trans thing is, it's obviously been a really big hot button issue, and obviously J.K. Rowling has been quite a lightning rod of controversy for that. But what I seem to have noticed is that whereas in the first year or two after J.K. Rowling started to speak out on transgender ideology, there was like a very big backlash against her. Right. I think you are now seeing a kind of many more people feeling like they can now basically stand next to her and say, come on, it's time for some sense in this whole debate, isn't there? It's no longer... You no longer are quite tarred with the same sense of being a social pariah if you stand up for J.K. Rowling. I think people are just aware that, hang on, yeah, there's a sense of equilibrium that needs to be established in this debate. So I'm encouraged by that. I feel like the pendulum is starting to swing back a little bit in the direction of a kind of sensible point.
When I think when the comedians are bold, I think it points to actually some kind of health within the kingdom, because this is obviously painting with a broad brush. But when the jesters were starting to be killed in different royal courts, it pointed to the fact that the person in power was losing their grip, at least on the kingdom, if not on reality entirely, if they couldn't laugh at themselves. And that's one of those things, like, just since I talk mainly to men on my audiences, if you're working on a construction crew, or you've joined a jiu-jitsu gym, or you've got a softball league you play on, and if guys start, making fun of you or giving you crap or all that, and you get really offended, if you get huffy and slam your lunchbox and take off or something like that, you're not going to be trusted by those men. And so the reason why men kind of do that to each other is to kind of learn boundaries and learn that, oh, this person has thick skin. If stuff starts to pop off, I can rely on this person. The same thing is true about comedians. If they're in an environment like the UK, where if they say a joke, they might be arrested. If they send a tweet, they might have to go to prison. Then it's one of those things to where it's like, you can't really tell whether or not you have the government has your back. If we're all doing this together, it feels more like a totalitarian, top down enforcement of a particular ideology, if that makes sense. Let's talk about the podcast. So obviously you're no longer doing Unbelievable with Justin Brierley. So I no longer have to type unbelievable ? And then not capitalize the next word in my sentence. So I don't have to do that anymore. What's the new podcast called? Why'd you launch it? Why is it set up the way that it is?
So the new podcast is The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. So exactly the same title as the book, but really it's a deep dive into the contents of the book, the story of the rise and fall of new atheism, but also the rise of this new conversation on God with public intellectuals like Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, Tom Holland, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. So, and then the neat thing is, as I said, is that I can start to include some of these very recent stories that have been coming to attention. So we kind of basically, it's very simple, because I've taken each chapter, 7 chapters of the book, and I'm devoting 3 of these episodes to each chapter. So about 21 episodes plus some bonus episodes makes it a kind of a narrative arc of about 30 episodes for this podcast. And it's done in a very sort of in-depth documentary style. approach. So if you've ever listened to something like the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast, different content, but similar style in terms of a more of a documentary polished style, the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, that kind of feel. It's a lot more labor intensive, but I'm really enjoying the creative process because we get to use music, we get to kind of sculpt a bit of a sense of a dynamic sense of what's going on. And I've just had overwhelmingly positive feedback since we launched it about a month and a half ago. We're about 7 or 8 episodes in now. And yeah, I'm just really enjoying being able to sort of do something very different to those kind of conversational type podcasts that, I've done for many years now, going really back to my roots, actually, where I began in radio, creating features and documentaries and so on. So I'm really enjoying that. And you can go and listen. It's available on all major podcast platforms. And if you want to support the podcast, it obviously takes time and money and resource to create these kinds of resources, then people can do that as well.
Guys, make sure that you watch that and listen to that. That'll be in the show notes. But Justin, that's like 30 episodes, and then that'll be in your past, and that'll just be something that you did. What's the next thing? Are you going to be coming back to the heated debates between smart people and dumb people? Like, what's the next thing? Is it another book? Is it a series of books? What are we doing here?
There's a lot potentially, going on. I mean, I should say, first of all, that given that we're already seeing a really big audience coming up behind this new podcast, we're not intending to simply cut it off at the 30 once we've told the story. I think there's going to be lots more stories to tell of the surprising rebirth of belief in God. So that'll be an ongoing project. But yes, there are other things that we're hoping to do. I began a new company this last year, Think Faith, where we're going to be starting to produce more podcast videos. You're going to see a lot more, going out in terms of video stuff as well. And yes, I do plan to return to what I'm probably best known for, which is sitting in the middle of interesting debates and discussions. So look out for something along those lines in the coming year. I don't have an exact timeline for that yet, but it's something that I've missed doing. I'd love to get back into doing, and I'm sure I will return to doing in the not too distant future. So look out for that.
You need to get into it again, because when I would listen to the Unbelievable podcast, one of my favorite things to do would be like, which person does Justin like better? And I would like try to figure it out based on the questions and based on how many times you would interrupt the person. And I felt like I got pretty good at it. I should have just been sending you emails like, you like this person, you like that person. So if we could come back to that, that would be great. But my last request that I have for you before we let you go and get on with your Christmas plans and all that is the copy of the book that I have is still the ARC copy. Look at this floppy thing.
Man,
look,
you need to get the nice version. You need to get the fully nice, properly printed and bound version. I'll get you one, Kyle. I'll send you one.
Okay. And I want you to write me a really sweet note on the inside saying how I'm your favorite ginger and you don't really hate Ireland as much as it seems. Like those types of things.
Yeah,
just sneak it in there.
Absolutely. I'll write a very special message just for you, Kyle, and delighted to do so.
Well, very good. Well, all kidding aside, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, it is our 2023 book of the year. I thought it was just absolutely fantastic. It's high quality like everything you do. But before we let you go, is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
Well, if you want to get hold of the book, you can actually get a signed copy yourself. We're making those available through my own website, justinbrierley.com. So you can do that, and you can sign up to the newsletter, keep abreast of all that we're doing. You can get hold of the podcast there as well, of course, and support these new initiatives that I'm trying to launch in the coming year. But thank you just for the amazing support you've given, Kyle. I've been absolutely delighted to see your own show flourish and the way in which you want to encourage others as well along the way. So bless you.
Very good. All right. Until next time, we'll see you then.
Yeah. God bless. Have a happy Christmas and a great new year.
You too. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And also, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.